Hello and welcome back to the 100 Day Art Challenge. This video will be number 58 of 100, so we are getting through it and it is barreling towards the end, as I always say. But I thought I would upload a couple of real-time videos in a row. Yesterday was a real-time landscape sketch, and this one is going to be another real-time landscape sketch, but a little bit longer than yesterday's video. Still, I think there's merit in showing the process from mixing the paint, as you can see now, and the paint is drying on my palette. I have this issue of squeezing out too much paint from the tube. It will then dry on the palette, and I have to push through this firm layer, this skin on the top of the paint that I've squeezed out the day before, in order to get to the mixable paint and then get working. But I'm mixing a very yellowy green, quite a light green, but it will be a tertiary colour, because as much as I'm mixing a bright yellow that could be a primary, I'm mixing it with a green and mixing it with white. So this will push it into the tertiary scale of the colour palette. And I'm going to try and describe something which I saw whilst I was on a walk with my mum, and we saw, it was a lovely warm day, and there was just this amazing pathway, grass pathway going up a hill, and you could see this mound of grass coming down from the left, and that sloped down on the right with some fencing, and the shadows being cast from the right hand side over to the left were really nice, and it was very it was just very scenic. It was very pleasant, kind of classical landscape inspiration. So I quickly snapped a photograph. It would have been something which on another day I could have sat there and painted, but I didn't have my equipment with me. It wasn't the right time, so instead I'm painting it from photo reference, and just trying to show now how I will get the big shapes in first and block in the big green, yellowy green section, so that you can then mix in your other tones and details afterwards. But getting the big mound, the biggest shapes in first, are an important part of any piece of artwork. It is unusual for me to work on a white surface. Normally I will put down a ground, but for both of the real-time pieces, both yesterday and this one today, I'm showing how I will sometimes work on just a white ground, and it's just because I primed the board that I'm painting on, and normally I give it either an orange or a brown ground colour to build on, but not on this occasion. And the only reason I don't like painting on white is because you always seem to miss the tiniest part, just a little speck, and that white coming through really affects the overall finish and relation between the colours, because white is such a strong colour, or tone, especially tone, to reflect light, and it alters the whole piece. The more you can remove the white from the surface, the better, in my view, a painting becomes, because white is too much of an overpowering tone. It's just far too light for pieces of work, especially like this. Now this is only a sketch, but still my intention to paint over all of that white if possible, and it is a very yellowy green that I'm trying to push here, because the sun was bright that day, and it has a lovely effect on the grass and on the landscape, and showing that warmth will really describe that and create that atmosphere for the viewer. And I am trying to replicate the experience of seeing that, even if it was only for a moment, for me to take a quick snapshot of this beautiful scene. It's that which I'm using as a jumping off point for every decision that I make, is the feeling of being there as well as what the information in the photo reference is telling me. Now it's not going to be an incredibly accurate or tight painting at all. I'm going to keep this really loose. That's why I keep calling it a sketch. It's a landscape sketch. It's not full painting. and full paintings of landscapes, portraits or any subject can be loose, but I think it's because of the intention behind this painting is to just get a quick impression and not fully render or spend too much time trying to realize the potential of the painting, and instead just to get down an impression, just something which is enjoyable, is what makes it a sketch to me more than it being an actual painting. I could return to this, and I may do return to this in the future in order to finish it off to be a landscape painting, but for now it remains as a sketch. And I think, I don't know if you agree, but the negative space above the white space I already think is quite a nice composition with the ground. Having this mound of grass on the left, this lovely pathway coming from the viewer's vantage point off into the centre, and then the slope from the centre down to the right leaves this lovely several diagonals, you know, on the surface. You have the diagonals of the pathway and of the direction of the grass, sloping from the top left to the bottom right. Well, not the bottom right, but to the middle centre right. And that's what I think is makes this quite a nice composition for a painting. And what I'm trying to do now is just to interrupt some of this yellowy green with more earth tones, more browny greens and browny yellows, because I want to show that this is foliage. It's not just grass, it's actually bushes, it's hedges, it's bits of wood as well from bark from some trees that have come down, and all sorts of things. But I'm not going to describe anything in too much detail. I just want to make sure that there is varied tones in the landscape to try and reflect that the landscape itself is not just grass, and even when it is just grass, you can introduce, and probably should introduce, other colours than just green. But introducing brown and flesh tones and yellows, to me, strengthen the description of a landscape. And if you really look at the grass in a scenery in scenery that you are admiring, I believe that you will see flesh tone colours, and by flesh tone I mean, you know, yellowy pinks and things, which are just what the paint is called, or flesh tint. But I think that you see those in the grass just as you see different yellows and browns as well. And it's really varied. It isn't just green by itself, and it can be tricky to describe that, and it can mean that you put something down on the surface and then have to go over it again. But even if you're covering what you've just done, it will leave behind slight marks and indicators that something was there, and that alone can make the landscape more interesting. So even when you're changing your mind and going completely back over what you've just done, it will still aid the painting, because it will have a difference than what it would have been with just a flat green, and instead you will have introduced a different colour and tone and possibly even texture to the landscape than what you would have had were it to have been just the same colour. Brushstrokes have a big effect on the texture as well that you're trying to describe, so I'm trying to push the brushstrokes out to the left now to describe the shadows, but also make sure that what they're describing is going to reflect what the surface area does as well. And by that I mean that if it's flat, then I will try to flatten the brush, and if it is textured and it has either blades of grass or bushes or hedges, then I will, instead of making the brush flat, I will try to make my brush movements reflect the fact that there is going to be different surfaces that catch the light, and also possibly even describe how things move in the breeze, because that's part of what impressionistic painting offers. And and why I think it's really a pleasant and valuable approach to making paintings is that it shows the effect of life and the air and the environment have on its subject. Now, the painting progresses quite quickly. As you can see, as you introduce darker tones, you're immediately confronted with different shapes and shadows and parts of the landscape which are possibly at the moment not as pleasant as what it was when it was flatter, but that's part of this push and pull that I mentioned earlier. Thankfully, what I've done here is left a lot of green on my brush so that when I introduce a blue to the brush, you have a really nice greeny blue that happens, and this makes a much better sky than what I sometimes have on my landscape paintings. And I think that's part of the strength of this picture itself, is that if I were to return to finish off this painting, which I'm very tempted to do, one thing that I probably wouldn't touch is the sky, because I love this colour that I'm mixing and introducing here. It's a much better blue than I normally have, and that's thanks to the green still being on the brush. And that just shows how much you can play with this colour of a sky and how much of a benefit you can get from mixing a different blue than just a bright blue or a mid blue. You can have this greeny blue or yellowy blue, which really changes the environment, and I think adds a lot of warmth to the sky that would otherwise have been a lot cooler were it to be a standard blue, either a royal blue, a cobalt, or anything even mixed with a white to make it much lighter would have been a lot cooler than this blue, which obviously has the yellows from the previous green still in there, and I think adds a lot to describe the heat of the day, and mixes quite well with the greens of the landscape, because it all speaks to the time of year and tries to describe the effect of the heat on the land. So that's something which I really value from that mix there. And that was incidental, it wasn't planned out, it was just that I happened to have not removed or washed my brush and removed all the paint from the brush well enough to clean it. So that's why I have the benefit of this lovely greeny blue there. Very nice. But I do want some clouds in the sky as well, because it wasn't a clear blue sky. It did have some clouds which I think are beautiful and help the composition of landscape. So I want that in there, but I have to be careful to not lose this really pleasant blue that I was just talking about. So what I do is try to mix it in and blend it, but create cloud shapes with the way that I move the brush. Now at the moment it just looks as though I'm losing the blue, but in actuality what occurs is that you're getting a blend of a lighter blue and then trying to show that the cloud shapes on top of there will become this lovely wispy impression that then start to again show how the sky is light, it's warm, it's bright, and it also has this lovely effect of light wispy clouds that occur. So you have the deeper blue on the right, a lighter blue that's been affected by the white on the left, and then I will introduce some cloud shapes, but at the moment I'm just using the benefit that I have of this mix to lighten certain aspects of the landscape as well. Because the light is coming from the right hand side and the shadows are being cast across the ground from the right to the left, this also means that there will be highlights on certain parts of the landscape, so I'm trying to make sure that I capture that as well, because that's the important part of describing form and the different planes of the landscape, much like when you're painting or drawing a portrait, to show the planes of the face and how they're affected by the light source and the direction of that light. So that's what I'm doing here, is trying to introduce certain lighter tones onto the areas which will describe where the light's coming from and why the shadow is being cast the way that it is. But it's also to try and create this harmony between the land and the sky. When you have the same colour and mixture of the sky in the landscape and mixed into these greens, it really creates this pleasant kind of unification between the two planes of the sky and the land. You can't always do that, but when it comes to this really greeny blue, it seems to work quite well in that way, to me at least anyway. So this is what I'm trying to achieve when it comes to showing this landscape. And I know that at the moment it may still look a little bit up in the air, but that's why I'm experimenting a little bit with squashing my brush on the landscape to see what happens when I try different ways of applying the paint there on the surface to describe the foliage and the breaks that happen in the grass, and something which doesn't quite look like a standard brush stroke. And I think that can be equally pleasant. I think that's why people use the benefit of the palette knife. Just as paintbrushes can describe things in delicate strokes, the palette knife can give you some unpredictable variations into the application of paint, which I think really adds a lot and gives a lot of benefit to artists for landscape painting. And this closer angle will show here the work that I'm trying to put in, keeping it loose, but making sure there are enough colours and tones to show a nice summer or late spring day. Fairly certain it was summer. I lose track though, time seems to have been disappearing. But for a sketch you can see that this is developing and coming along quite nicely. There are certain parts that might need rendering a little bit clearer and slightly different in order to benefit the piece as a whole, but that's why I think with several of these paintings for the challenge I'm tempted to go back and finish them off after the challenge is complete. But for now, as a collection, they are quite enjoyable to look at all together. They are an interesting bunch of paintings, drawings, sketches and descriptions from my experiences this year. And obviously there are lots more to go, and there are lots more that are in the can at the moment waiting to be edited and uploaded as a daily video for this challenge. But so far I just think that it's been quite a pleasant and illuminating way of really pushing yourself to make art. So if you ever are tempted to see any kind of progression with your own work, then I recommend trying something like a 100-day challenge, or even just do a 30-day challenge, because that's a month. But to do something every day for a month, you will see a progression occur. You have to force yourself to make work. Sometimes it's a lot easier to wait until you're in the mood to make a painting or a drawing. But if you have an incentive to make more work, then you will find yourself discovering certain ways of making art and finding subjects to draw or paint that you wouldn't have done otherwise. And you will at some point realise that unless you forced yourself into this position, you would have never had the paintings or drawings that you do have, because you would have made different decisions. Different things in your life would have guided you in different directions. So that's all part of why I really appreciate this challenge. And this was a challenge which was introduced to me by my friend Petra, because she was doing a 100-day challenge, and not for painting or drawing, but in her own way, doing the 100-day challenge. And for me, it had to be painting and drawing and a little bit of sign writing, which I don't believe that video has been uploaded yet. Part of the problem that I have come across with these videos is losing track of what I have and haven't yet uploaded. And here you can see that I'm introducing these cloud shapes now into the sky, and I've got a much smaller brush, and I am doing it with the white. But whilst the sky is wet, it will soften this white colour and brush in, and I'm just trying to make sure that the cloud shapes are fluffy and they are lighter on the top. Not lighter, sorry, they are more blended in certain places so that they are not I don't know, so I'm trying to make sure they're representing what I actually saw and experienced that day, and also to serve the landscape and the composition that I've built so far, because I do think there is something nice which is occurring in the warmth of the landscape that we can see here, and making sure that the brush strokes are consistent with those on the ground, but also going in a similar direction so as to describe the environment of the day. And this can be a tricky part because you can see here this will turn into a cutting in approach for the landscape below it, to try and paint in clouds that then jut up against part of the landscape you've already painted. Means that you will be interrupting that edge of the landscape. But it's important that I get this down because the sky is an important element of the landscape painting generally, and certainly for this piece I very much enjoy the way that it works because of the lovely greeny blue that you saw me mix earlier, and the gradient that occurred when I first tried to introduce clouds, and instead I mixed in the paint so that it has the lighter side on the left and the darker greeny blue on the right, so as to now introduce clouds means that you have all those layers in the sky, which then create a bit more of a convincing sky and a pleasant plane in order to see this interaction between the sky and the clouds. And along with all of these details on the ground, I think that these wispy and broken clouds add quite a bit of atmosphere to what was a lovely warm day. And as this is only a sketch, there's not much left to go. It's almost finished. I'm quite happy with how it looks. I think it's quite a pleasant landscape, but you can see there would be several parts where I could obviously just do a few brush marks and it would just describe things slightly differently. But there we are. That's the painting. I hope you enjoyed it. I appreciate you watching. I will be uploading a video every single day, so hopefully I will see you tomorrow.